tātou nau mai hoki mai e hoa mā ki tā tātou akomanga. Welcome everybody, welcome back to our wānanga. Today, very fortunate to have our pū kōrero with us to share his mātauranga, and very lucky to have him here with us. I hope we had time to just replenish after all that wānanga we had this morning. And paku tikanga for us before we get underway is if you've got any pātai, for Sam today, feel free to use the chat function, and I'll throw them Sam's way throughout our kōrero when I can, and if not, we can paku kōrero towards the end of this. And where possible, turn on our cameras just to make it a little bit more interactive, and so we can see everybody's beautiful faces. Ko tātou tēnei. Again, once again, apologise. We've got all these abstracts from all our pū kōrero, and when I clicked the share button, they looked about this small, and I said, I hope it's this one. It's called download 1. The next one's download 2, 3, 4, 5. However, not. Ko tai tātou, and as I was saying, here's the star of the show, no reira, kei a koe te rākau kōrero. Sam, will pass it over to you. Kia ora rai hoa.
Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia te here tangata. Ka rongo te ao, ka rongo te pō, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora koutou, ko waioweka te ngāhere, ko kōranga te awa, ko poke hinau te maunga, ko te aitanga a mahaki, ko tūhoi, ko Ngāti Ira ngā iwi, ko waiau, ko Sam Gibson ahau. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to listen to me, just a humble bushman. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate being invited to come and yarn on this kaupapa. It's amazing, some of the speakers we've heard, so I'm quite humble. But this story starts with a kākano tāwa. Starts in the canopy of the tāwa tree. This kākano tāwa, it started to grow, and as it grew, it avoided being browsed by the possum. And as it grew into ripeness. And as it became ripe, it dropped to the ground. When this kākano tāwa dropped to the ground, it had to avoid being eaten by the poaka, the pig, that had been enticed from the farmland back into the ngahere. And we all know that the pig, he knows exactly when each fruiting species fruits in the ngahere, so he comes off of the farmland into the bush. And this particular kākano tāwa avoided being eaten by the poaka. It also avoided being roasted on the fires of tūhoi in Te Urawera. It made it to the ground, into the soil, to be nurtured and to reach its potential as a seed, as a kākano, and to grow into a tall tāwa tree. Similarly, my journey into the bush kind of happened in the same way. I was lucky enough to be raised by some pretty incredible parents. My father, we were raised on the bank of the Hamanatua stream here in Tairāwhiti. My father used to take us into the bush a lot, mostly because our mother was kind of sick of us by the weekend, and take us into the bush and teach us a lot of the things that he knew and he carried with him. And my mother is this beautiful nurse. She's a holistic natural nurse, and she knows a lot of plant knowledge, a lot of rongoa as well. But my grandfather, he taught me how to hunt and fish, and this ability to provide kai really excited me and hooked me into the bush as well. But later on in my schooling, I went to a pretty amazing school, Taikura Rudolf Steiner School, and they would do weird things to us. So they were not in a weird way. They would do weird things in a way that they would send us out into the bush by school and say, hey, for the next hour, can you sit and look at this rake and observe it? And we'd just do that for an hour. We'd sit there and we'd watch as the ngangara came along and they interacted with the rako, and as the rako brushed leaves with the other rako, and as the manu came and landed there, and we would just sit there and watch. And then we would come back to the classroom and we'd write about it. So that was a pretty cool school, and I don't know how that is in other schools at the moment, but it was pretty neat way of going to school. They also realized that the classroom may not be the best classroom for me as I hit sort of 12, 13, 14. Where I was living at the time, there was a real, not in our whānau, but around us, the social scene was a real kind of bogan, druggy, hippie, surfer kind of vibe. And the people I was looking up to at that time weren't going to get me on a real good trajectory. So my school and my parents realized that, hey, that maybe classroom's not the best classroom for him at the moment. Maybe we'll send him into the bush. And so they sent me up to Te Urewera. And in Te Urewera, no, they had sent me up for like a week in the middle of a 10-week term, because terms were pretty long for me as a pretty busy young fella, and they'd send me up there in my school holidays. And in Te Urewera, I became a trapper. And I used to trap alongside these beautiful tūhoi bushmen that gave me heaps of stick, because I was like, look at me, I'm 6'4", I'm gangly as, according to some of those really knowledgeable tūhoi bushmen, I was never going to cut it as a bushman in the bush, because I'll get tangled up in everything, and I wasn't short and stocky and wasn't good for carrying things. So that is what that is. But these guys also, unlike the people I was looking up to in the community at home, these guys didn't drink, they didn't do drugs. They started their day at 4 a.m. in the morning with mōtiatia and karakia. And like there's this one guy, Keith, he used to like wear like a woolen bush t-shirt like I'm wearing now, and like fleecy trousers, no boots, middle of winter, no boots, like ice on the ground, no boots. And he just used to take a machete with him in the bush. No kite, he'd just harvest kite from the bush. No water, he'd drink at the streams. And he taught me, you know how I was talking about school, they kind of teach you to observe. Keith taught me in trapping how to observe the things that were important to trapping, important to that whenua, that ngahere there. Taught me how to read the manu and go, oh yeah, so this is where I need to go and what I need to do. And so for me as a young person, the bush really made sense, and it was a real cool place to be. And I found out if I worked real hard and gave all my sweat and energy into the ngahere, Tāne would look after me, Haumia would look after me, Maru would look after me, and Tahiri Mati. You know, so if I put in my energy, I would be looked after in the way of kai and being able to stay safe and all of that as well. 12 years later, though, I found myself in Fjordland. I'd been to university and all of that, graduated through Te Urewera, through the Ruihine, and I'd found my way to Fjordland. And Fjordland was amazing. I was trapping, but also we were catching pikopiko, we were chasing down takahe with nets. We were catching kiwi and fjord. It was just like exposed to all these beautiful things in this beautiful landscapes. But also while I was there, we lost our friend Stu. And Stu, he was working in the tourism industry at the time, and I was working as a trapper, but he was a guide and we were working in the same landscapes. And Stu fell off a bluff and he passed away. And that hit me really heavily. Sorry, I was told to talk about some of my formative experiences, and this is one. So sorry if we're getting too deep and too heavy, but it was quite formative. And so we lost our friend Stu, and it really solidified for me. It was really confronting. I was like, okay, so this person that I am and this work that I do in the ngahere, it could easily take my life. So it has to be a valuable use of my time as an individual and a valuable use of me as a resource to my whānau. And so it was a pretty big deal. And anyway, we were doing heaps of crazy things. Like we were in the huts at night, we would have to sharpen the edges of our boots with our hunting knives to get a nice sharp edge on it so we could hook them into the rocks so we didn't fall off the bluffs. And we'd get picked up by helicopters, and our helicopter flights for 45 minutes. And we'd fly through the mountains, and sometimes it would become a whiteout. And there'd be snow on the hills. And we'd have to fly sideways in the helicopter against the hills to try and see where the black rocks were sticking out through the snow. And that's the only way that we could tell in the helicopter where the land finished and the sky started. And so that was some pretty sketchy things going on. And that was all good, and that was all in a day's work. But it really put it into perspective, and it really solidified how much I cared about looking after our whenua. Hopefully that's not too deep. And there was a little disclaimer there though. So with the Department of Conservation at that time, I really backed a lot of the work we were doing, but it was becoming more and more disconnected. Our people were being hauled out of the bush and being put in offices. And so if this was going to be something that was beneficial use of my time, then it had to be an approach that suited, and that was becoming less and less an organization that aligned with my values and what I had learned in Te Uruwera. So what I did learn though is that, because I was managing projects, and we learned that when we had people present in this landscape trapping every day, we got better results than when we had people doing operations from an office and not being present in the landscape. And we learned that our trappers knew each kaka, each pair of kaka, and how many kaka they bred each year. They had an intimate relationship with each manu in that area of bush, and they could tell me, we knew kind of what the Pikopiko were doing, what the deer numbers were doing, all that sort of thing. And because they cared about the kaka, they did a really good job trapping, and that's why we got those sort of results when people were in the landscape. And I was monitoring using contractors, and they would come in with their field notes, and they'd share their notes with me, their observational data, their Mātauranga. And of course, being from the North Island, we call it Mātauranga. Down there, they call it observational notes. And that was real cool. And that's how we started to understand the ecosystems better. And it was actually better and more detailed than the Western science departmental way of monitoring an ecosystem. So it really got me thinking. And you may have seen the other day, Tāne Malcolm, a man that I like respect 100%. He's like a guru in this space, love the Braden. But he put out a little discussion document the other day. Is poisoning predators the Māori way? And that's something that I'm keen to discuss a little bit. So traditionally, we would burn kawakawa over our komara mara, and that would burn it, and the smoke would chase away the ngangara that would stuff off our komara. That's a real intimate relationship with komara and kawakawa and ngangara. But when we are talking about the toxicants and predator control that we're talking about now in the department way of thinking, we're actually talking about removing the people from the landscape, irrespective of the method we're using. Our people aren't there operating on the ground, and they're not seeing the same things. They're not able to practice their mātauranga. And I wonder, when it comes to predator control, if that's a stretch. To say that poisoning is the Māori way. And so here in this yarn today, I've been asked to yarn about kai, about some of our mātauranga, and sort of how that can be applied in modern land management's a weird term because it kind of manages us in a lot of respects, but in that space. I'll just start by saying I don't know anything about anything, but I've got a few ideas about a few things. And one of those things is that people are really excited about kai. And when we talk about boring conservation stuff, people kind of switch off. But when we talk about kai, they go, oh, yeah, okay, that affects my puku, that affects me directly. Really excited about that. So this mātauranga that we're going to talk about today is about how we hook people in to caring about the whenua and how we hook people in to caring about themselves through our mahinga kai species. This here is tawa. We talked about tawa before and pigs and possums. Tawa is really delicious. Who's eaten tawa? I'm sure, yep, a few hands going up. Tawa is a little bit turpentine, a little bit yuck. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, it looks delicious, I'll have a taste. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to eat that. And I can tell you, after 10 days in the bush with no fresh vegetables, it's way tastier than on the first day. But the real gem of tawa is its kernel. And its kernel is really oily and really fatty and really delicious, good source of carbohydrates. Good for us as people, good for the pigs. If the pigs are getting fat, that picture there, Wemata, my wife, doesn't like it too much, but that's the insides of a pig's puku. It's been eating tawa, and it's a nice tawa porridge. And if the pigs are eating tawa, they become fat and oily and all that good thing that we love about pork. So tawa is great for our puku, but it's also great for the other species in the bush too. But we can use tawa because it's so tasty to possums as a chew card. So the possums, they leave their two imprints in the tawa nut, the kernel, and we can look at those on the ground and say, hey, have we got a real possum problem? And if the tawa is not fruiting and dropping fruit, we can go, hey, we really do have a possum problem. And so that's how we can use tawa to monitor the impacts of possums in the bush. Who's eaten tāwhara before? Oh, team, these are like the bush lollies. These are the best thing ever. They like excite me so much. They're absolutely delicious. The petals are just, oh, and the fruit themselves are like, you know, those jelly cups that we like shouldn't buy our kids, but we sometimes do. Like the inside of tāwhara is just, oh, amazing. Sorry, tāwhara is the fruit of the kiakia. Traditionally, we would have to wrap the tāwhara up in its own leaves and bind them at the top, because who else likes tāwhara? The kiore. And the kiore loves tāwhara, so we have to wrap them in its own leaves so the kiore did not penetrate the leaves and they did not eat the tāwhara. But guess what? In a modern context, we can use it as a monitoring tool. So where there's high numbers of rats and possums, there's no tāwhara. The kiakia can't fruit because it just gets eaten straight away. But in areas where we've got predator control happening, we can use tāwhara as a really sensitive monitoring tool, because the rats and the possums love them so much, and they've got different sized teeth, so you can kind of read who's eating what. And so tāwhara is a real sensitive tool for monitoring the impacts of rats and possums at low densities. And it's a real good tool because you're pretty motivated to bring those rats and possums down because you want to eat the tawhara as well and leave some for the manu. So it's a good tool in that respect, pretty motivating. Kohia. Who recognises kohia? Who's eaten kohia? Leanne's like all over all this kai. It's awesome. I love it. So kohia is our native New Zealand passion fruit. And the real trick to kohia is the flesh on the outside of the seeds is quite sweet, so you can suck them off. But if you bite the seeds, they can be quite bitter. So don't make that mistake when you're eating kohia. Is don't chomp the seeds, spit those out. But kohia seeds used to be really, well, they are really good because they've got a beautiful oil, and it used to be used as hair oil as well. But in a modern context, in the conservation world, we use kohia in the waiweka as a chew card. So kohia's got this cool shell, and on the top it's yellowy orange, and straight underneath it it's white. And the rats, they love kohia, but so do the manu. And so when the kohia fruits, we go out there and we look around and at all the different fruits, and we see if there's 2 scratches, it's a little rat, and if there's 1 big peck, then it's the manu. And our whole thing is, our monitoring tool is, hey, we want them all to be eaten by manu and no scratches by rats. So when the kohia fruits, it's the time of year that we monitor our rats. We go out there, we look at the kohia, and we monitor those scratches. Who loves Pikopiko? Pretty much everyone, eh? Mōuku is my favorite species of Pikopiko, and Mōuku is also the Tia's favorite species of Pikopiko. So traditionally, how we monitor in Western science, how we monitor deer is by fecal pellet counts in like a 10 by 10 meter plot. We go on our knees and we count how many poos is on the ground. But it doesn't really tell us the impact that deer are having on our mahinga kai species. So in the waiweka, we monitor our mōuku beds. And we monitor our mōuku beds by looking at them and seeing how much deer browse there is. And if there's an abundance of Pikopiko, we're like, yes, that's great. And if it's all chewed out, we're like, we need to shoot more deer. So when it's chewed out, our hunters go out and we shoot all the hinds we can find. We let our helicopter operators know, shoot all the hinds, go for gold. And that will result in more Pikopiko in the system, more food in the system, and fatter deer. So it's beneficial to us as hunters because the deer are fat, and we've also able to take home a bunch of Pikopiko for our whānau as well. And that's the type of monitoring that I'm really interested in, is like when our young people come through and they're like, oh, we love Pikopiko into it, then they are motivated to shoot the deer as well because they need to protect their kai species. Kareao. Everyone knows Kareao as well. Supplejack. Gangly people like me get caught up in it and trip over all the time. Kareao is this beautiful, sweet, lots of people call it bush asparagus, and it's the deer love it too. So we use that in the same way to monitor deer. But we can also use the deer to monitor forest health. So a lot of people in the space get a little toey about like monitoring forest health using like introduced kai or contemporary kai, and I look at it as deer. We're no longer able to harvest many of our manu, which is where we would like to be one day of such abundance, but hey, we've got deer at the moment. And if you look at that picture there, that's a really skinny hind, and she's telling us that, hey, you have very little kai, very little palatable rako left in the system. You probably need to shoot a lot of deer, and you probably need to manage your possums really well. So if our freezers aren't full of fat venison, then we need to do more work on the hill, and we'll get the rewards for that as well with fat venison. And one day, hopefully lots of fruiting species and plentiful manu in abundance. And who knows, the government may be real generous and look at some legislative change. But we know we won't go there today. Kohia kohia. Kohia kohia is a real cool rako. Real good for rongo around women's health, but really delicious like candy floss for the possums as well. So where kohia do not fruit where there's high abundance of possums, but they fruit where you've got real low numbers. So where you see kohia fruit, you're like, yes, we've done a good job on the possums. Horoweka, the possums love to eat the tips. Have you ever eaten the tips of the horoweka? It's like not super tasty, but it's quite palatable. They'll just eat the tips and leave all the leaves all over the forest floor. And so we see that there, they'll strip an entire tree. So horoweka used to be used for our spears for harvesting kiriri. So it is related to our kai as well. But yeah, where you see this here, you go, our possum numbers are way too high. And the same with pātati as well. This guy here is one of my favorite. Rehua and I, my son and I, we go into the beech forest and we lick the bums of insects because honeydew is absolutely delicious. If you know the honeydew scale insect, they sit inside the bark of the beech tree and they have this long tail. And at the end of that tail, they have this lovely little droplet of sweet, sugary honey. And so, and it's real funny too, because you like tell all the kids, oh, go lick those things off those little spikes on the trees. And then we go, you just licked the ngangara bumps. Anyway, that's fun. But you know who also likes the honeydew? Our moko, our little lizards, they love it. And our native ngangara as well. So the honeydew feed all of these beautiful creatures in our beech forest. And they're a great kai for us, real good energy when you're hunting, eh? But wasps, introduced wasps love it too. And they're much more virulent, they're much more aggressive in their feeding. So one way of monitoring the impacts it is having on our native insects and our moko that can be starved out is to literally go around and lick the butts of all the insects and eat all your honeydew. And if you're getting a lot, chances are your insects and your moko are doing well. If you're not getting any, it means you need to do some work on your wasps. Eh? Weta. Lots of people don't like weta. I think weta are cool. I like getting sung to sleep in my hammock in the bush by weta. They're real lovely. But who else loves weta? The rats. The rats love eating weta. So when you are in the bush, usually you won't hear many weta, and that's because you've got high rat numbers. But particularly, you know kahikatea, they drop lots of bush lilies for us as well. They're real tasty. The kahikatea has that bark that has lots of crevices in it, and the tree weta likes to lay its eggs in those crevices. And those eggs are real tasty to the rats as well. And so where there's no rats, you just see white dots up all your kahikatea, and that's pretty cool. And where there are rats, you won't see any weta eggs at all. So it's pretty heavy kind of thing, but that's a really good monitoring tool for monitoring your rat abundance as well. And guess what fat trout indicate? These guys here, I'd love to be in a position where we had an abundance of our native species, but in most waterways now we've got an abundance of trout, and that's okay. But these guys here are a great monitoring tool, and they're real tasty, eh? Like everyone likes smoked trout out of rivers. They're real tasty, but they are a great indicator of fuel habitat. And so when we're doing conservation work for fuel, the first thing we do is go and talk to our trout fishermen, and we say, hey, where are you catching the fattest trout? Where are you catching the most trout, the biggest trout? And they'll point to particular parts in the river, because trout, they eat all our ngangara as well. So they eat all the insect larvae in the awa, and so do the fuel. And so that's quite cool when you can go, oh, our trout fishermen are pointing us to the fuel habitat, we go and put traps there, and then as soon as you put traps there and the fuels fledge and disperse, they go to those places that the fishermen knew about. And that's pretty cool, using trout as a koi species to monitor good fuel habitat. This here is a kiraru. At the moment, there's a bunch of people that are using kiraru. Well, everyone likes miro, eh? You ever stuffed a chicken with miro? I mean, that's pretty tasty. But kiraru, they get real fat on miro as well. Kiraru, they're just a really good tool to monitor how abundant your fruiting species are in an ecosystem. So if you've got lots of fruiting species, you'll get lots of kiraru turning up there because they come from a long distance. And when they're doing really well, they'll get really fat and they fall on the ground, and they're just real full of hinu. So that's really cool. One day I'd like to use kiraru as a monitoring tool, but also to be on our table. So the more hinu that a kiraru has in it is probably going to be an indicator of forest health, but also an indicator of your possums being low because they're getting the fruiting species away, low deer numbers because your fruiting species are getting through to the canopy. So I reckon kiraru is going to be a really important monitoring tool in the future for us as well. I want to yarn a little bit. You know how I was down in Fiordland, and you know how my grandfather taught me how to hunt and fish and that. When I came back to Tairāwhiti, we went back into the areas where my grandfather taught me to hunt and fish in the Waiweka, and the fuel that were once in abundance in all the rivers and the kiwi that we heard every night were all but gone. They were not really there anymore. And the mo'uki beds and the Pikopiko that used to just cover papa like a blanket, they weren't really there in abundance anymore either. And it was pretty sad. But we got together as a bunch of hunters and fishermen, and we kind of went, oh yeah, we reckon we could do something about this, but we reckon we could do something about this in a way that was light in Western science and kind of heavy on that Mātauranga, that sort of bush knowledge that we kind of have as hunters and fishermen. Hey, most hunters roll around and they can tell you exactly where this is and where that plant is because they know that the deer are going to be there eating the same koi species because the deer eat the same food we eat. The possums eat the same food, the rats eat the same food, etc. So, and the manu eat the same food. So our hunters and our fishermen are really onto it people when it comes to conservation and monitoring as well. But it's not just big, ugly, bearded bushmen that are running around the Eastern Fiordland. It's a lot of grandmothers, and that's really cool too. We've got a lot of our Pākeke are raising kids as well. So we've got Renee here, she raises her mokos, and she's incredible. She works full time, and then she also raises all the kids, and then she comes into the bush and does trapping as well. And she reckons being in the bush and harvesting koi and taking koi home for her moko are really that's a real positive thing for her, and she loves having that connection with the whenua through the Eastern Fiordland as well. Want to yarn a little bit about Tamariki in the bush, and like when you put people in the bush for a long period of time, as you guys probably all know, they start to quieten down and slow down. They start to, because kids in town are used to a real high pace of life. And you take them out into the ngahere, let them drink real nice water, let them harvest koi, or there's an opportunity to harvest koi out of the ngahere, and they start to slow down. They start to come back into balance with the ngahere and come come to just a more healthy place spiritually, physically, and mentally within themselves. And I reckon that's a really neat thing. And I reckon that's a real key philosophy to conservation and mahinga kai as well. Our wahine are often the best practitioners of this type of thinking, I reckon, because they notice more than us Tāne. We tend to have a mission in mind, and that might be harvesting kai. But our wahine tend to, like, our Tāne will go through and they'll like miss like several different birds or kai species. And then our wahine will come along and be like, hey, did you see this? Did you see that? Did you see that? And that's just like, it's really neat to see a shift from a male-dominated space, which it has been for quite some time, into more and more wahine owning it and being present in this space. Yeah, so that's real exciting. So this here, what Tui's holding here is a kiwi and bat monitor. And I don't want you to take what I'm saying here today as a like, hey, this Mātauranga is better than Western science for monitoring things. Western science has its place, and these monitoring tools, I reckon, really have their place. This bat monitor monitors Pikopiko when we can't see them, and it tells us where they are, their feeding behaviors, where they're roosting, all that sort of thing. And I think that's really valuable. I think the cool thing is that we can utilize Western science, and we can also utilize Mātauranga side by side. But I think we need to be a little bit careful. And I think we need to be careful around a couple of things. In this modern society, we really focus on efficiencies. And as we become more and more efficient, and we saw this through farming and industrial revolution, and also the urban drift, as we become more and more efficient, we, like with the likes of self-resetting traps, for example, we only have to visit a piece of whenua every 6 months. It means that you don't have to be there every 2 weeks or every month. Our trappers aren't present in the landscape all but twice a year all of a sudden. And that means they're not noticing that seasonal change. They're not noticing what's going on for that pair of kaka. They're not noticing what's going on for our moruku beds. They're not noticing all of those things that are really important to us understanding and having a strong relationship with the whenua and the ngahere. So what I'm saying is, hey, is it better to have a really efficient system, or is it better to have people present in the landscape doing the work? And the dollars seem to back that up as well. So typically it's really expensive to have people in the landscape, but it's really expensive in other parts of our lives not to have people present in the landscape. When our people are disconnected to the whenua, it comes out in all sorts of health statistics. It comes out in our young people not doing so well. It comes out in our well-being. So it's kind of like the financial cost of not having people present doing the work in the landscape, and the like outcomes cost. I don't know, to me it's like important. It's more of benefit to have people present in the landscape. At Eastern Field Link, for example, we have a lot of young people coming through, and they come through and we cut them deals. And our deal is, if you come into the bush and do this work and learn the stuff, then that's awesome. We'll keep these, we'll put you in helicopters, we'll get you your firearms license, we'll make sure you can take kai home to your whānau, and that's real cool. But you've got to stay in school. And so a lot of kids, the classroom's not the best classroom for them at the moment. And so we get them staying in school, and at 16, 17, 18, when they're ready to go into something else, we help them get into, that could be shepherding apprenticeship, building apprenticeships, it could go work in the bush. We're actually employing a bunch of them now, so we're getting a few of them coming in and being employed on the project, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's a cool thing as well. That getting the single mums, a lot of our schools over here, like one of our schools, I think it's was it 70% of our kids have been raised by single mums, 30% are single parents, and 30% of our kids are being raised by their grandparents. That's pretty huge. And when our mums are having to work 2 jobs to support that and raise kids, it's real important, I reckon, to get our mums and our grandmas out into the ngahere, give them a break, revitalize them, re-energize them. And that's all through both the looking after the whenua, but also the whenua looks after us by nurturing us with kai that they can take home as well. But then they're bringing out all of their kids as well, because they want them to come and be involved in the ngahere as well. So that's pretty cool. It's keeping this Mātauranga alive, and it's keeping our whānau well, and the whenua well, which is a real win. I've rambled a little bit much, so I apologize for that. But I get real excited about this space and these things. But I'm going to finish this up with one thought. The key to a thriving forest ecosystem is a connected people. People being in and living with the whenua. The key to protecting a species is to retain a relationship with it. About knowing each of those different individuals, about knowing the landscape that they're in. The simplest relationship is through kai. People are motivated by their puku, which shouldn't be thought of as a bad thing. That's a really cool thing. And so, hey, if we can hook our people into caring about the whenua through mahinga kai species, and we can hook them into caring about themselves through our mahinga kai species, I reckon that's one really awesome vehicle to see big changes and to see us being able to retain a balanced tile for the future. Yeah, that's me. But also,
Kareao, well, thank you for all of that. Jeez, well, before we've got there's a few parts that I've got to run past you, Sam, that popped up, and that didn't want to ruin the flow of your kōrero at the time. But just coming back to some of your other species of raka you were talking about. One of the parts was, can we eat kohe fruits?
No. Well, I haven't, and no, I don't think so. Everything that, I've never seen it. I use them for rongo, but yeah, I don't reckon they'd be too tasty.
Wait, one of the other parts was whether or not it was just whether there were any native species or any native animals who eat the moku, or is it just the deer that are interested in it, and yourself?
Any native species? I'm really interested in that myself. I think that's a really great question. I don't know more intimately, and I don't know their diet intimately, but it would stand to reason in my mind, and this is just me talking through a hole in my head, but it would stand to reason in my mind that those same palatable species are possibly and probably the same palatable species that moa would have fed on as well. They're succulent, they're juicy, they're sweet. If I was a moa, that's what I would like to be eating, and we had several species of moa as well. So they would have had different tiers, just like our manu now have different tiers in that canopy. I reckon that they would have had to be a kai for one of the moa, I think, but don't hold me to that. And I know that the slugs and stuff love to eat them as well. They really like to eat them.
Before we, just to let everybody know, shortly at the whānau, I'll open the floor to those of you who want to throw some pārtai towards some of the person putting them on the chat. I'll just use the raise hand function, and we can go to you to ask your pārtai. So if you've got a couple just to think over while I throw these last few ones Sam's way. So one of those pātai were for those who are looking to engage rangatahi and tamariki, and I suppose nowadays you've got there's a big move towards technology and online learning, and for some they want to get away from that. They want the interaction with Taiya, or they really want to promote the action, as opposed to like some sort of augmented reality. They prefer that, that their tamariki actually go and engage with the Taiya. Are there any do you have any whakaaro on how they might do that, whether they're whānau at home, whether they're teachers at schools? How might they get what's the first some initial steps for them to take?
I'll answer that question directly in a second, but I'll talk to something else for a second if that's okay.
All good.
Our tamariki are in this online space, hey? And I reckon there's some really neat people around too. Mike Cassidy, he's doing some cool work, and I reckon if we can get our hooks into our kids and kind of like put some sparks in there in that online forum, and it's a real hard one, because like a lot of this Mātauranga, I was yarning with a friend the other night as well, and I'm like, it feels weird sharing this stuff on like an online forum like this. Like I'd rather do it in the ngahere, because then we know who we're kind of sharing it with too, if you know what I mean. But then it's like, wow, we had this yarn, and it's like, well, how about we got to get these hooks into our kids somehow. So we've got to get them out into the bush somehow. And let's meet them on their space to start with, put those little fires, light those fires, and grab their spark. And then if we can do that on Facebook and Instagram, as terrible as that is, I reckon that's not too bad a thing. And then we can follow it up with those things in school. And we're getting a lot of programs now. Like we got 7 educational institutes connected with Eastern Field Link, for example, and they're using the tile as the ngahere as their classroom, which is cool. It's not that difficult, eh? Like we've got a gear library now for Eastern Field Link, so any kids that don't have gear, easy as. We got your raincoats, you got your boots, you got your fishing rods, you got everything you need. We've got all the food too, So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but there's also a lot of opportunities even just in our local parks. Like Rehua and I, we go 10 minutes from home, and there's some pretty beautiful examples of intact ecosystems right on our doorsteps, And I think these COVID lockdowns have been really good at helping us find those and helping us interact with those, because we've had to stay close to home. But in that school space, I reckon sparking their knowledge first and their interest first, and then getting someone in. There's bound to be lots of parents that aren't aware of the knowledge that they hold. I find a lot of people are very humble in this space, and they don't think they know a lot, but they know a lot. And finding those people that have a connection to that particular place, that particular school, and those particular kids in that whenua there, just go for a walk, eh? The kids, oftentimes we have to get out of our kids' way too. We think we're teaching the kids. No, we're not. Tāne is teaching the kids. Maru's teaching the kids. Haimi is teaching the kids. We just need to get out of the way. We can help facilitate the experience, but the kids often pick up on a lot of learning themselves. They're pretty intuitive.
It's a sort of, I suppose it brings into the next, this next part is, what rauemi, I mean, like what you've got there is actually Mātauranga tuku iho when you consider everything that's been taught to you from those from the kaumātua that taught you in Te Urewera, and how to observe those tohu o te taiao, the little intricacies like how many scratches are on there, and what kind of teeth marks are on there, and those sorts of things. And when we talk about Mātauranga tuku iho, then in essence is what it is it's that detail to look for, and to be able to provide and sustain and protect our environment. Are there any, I suppose, rauemi that outline a lot of those things, like your tāwhara for kiore, or, you know, or like the moku for deer, like you've got the correlation between the plants and the species that like to have it and what that could mean in regards to the ecosystem? Is there, what would your, are there any out there for people to look into, or even any courses or people to speak to? Or books?
There's really not, from what I've found, there's really not. And the generation that I was learning from and am learning from, they were really hesitant to share that knowledge too. It was real like, you're coming up into this space, yep, I'll teach you, you know. And like the book thing wasn't really their thing, you know, and the online resource really wasn't. There's a couple of people that I really respect in that space, and that's not a limited list, but Tūmai Cassidy down in Ōtako. There's a guy called Kahu Mahuika over on the west coast or the South Island. Obviously Tāne Malcolm's right up there. But, you know, there's lots and lots of people in that space, and I reckon that's the best way. Is just, as with everything, you know, like we can put stuff in a book, but until we're actually learning from people, it's a different type of learning, I reckon. But not to discount the book learning in that, it's real cool. And hopefully someone will bring out a book. Probably take someone a little bit more literary than myself.
And I see Hayley's hand. She's got a pātai for you. Sam Moreira, I'll let you send your pātai, Hayley.
Kia ora, Sam. I think following on from our panel discussion this morning, there's like this tension between wanting to be in Tāiao and foraging, but also the realization that our Tāiao is, you know, declining very rapidly. And so how do you strike, I suppose the first question is, how do you strike a balance between being in relation through native kai and also sustaining those environments? And I think the other thing too is like, is there a space for trapping for everybody, or is that purely for experts like yourself?
Firstly, I'm not an expert. I'm just a bushman. I don't know what I'm up to. But yeah, you're right. It's a real conundrum, eh? I'll take it back to the titi. The titi are loved by many of us. Like that hinu, that salty hinu of titi that just like drips down our like chins. It's just a beautiful thing, and it resonates with many of us. The titi are really threatened, with this global warming sort of situation, because their kai lives like, it's getting deeper and deeper in the water column as the water column warms up. And so the titi are going downhill a little bit from what I've read. But is it important to, and I'll disclaimer this in a second, but is it important to our people to retain the practice of harvesting titi and the amazing conservation work that's been done and the science that's been done around titi is purely driven by the people that are interested in the titi harvest? So through harvesting, you know, a quota or a low number, through harvesting, we're able to pump science and resources and care and energy into preserving the titi as a species. But I reckon it's something that we're definitely dealing with in Waiaweka. Like, there's not a lot of places in Waiaweka at the moment where it's actually sustainable to harvest moku pikopiko. It's just not a reality. Like, we need to shoot more deer before we're in that space. And I think it's okay to get a small handful every now and then, because it retains and it continues. Like, we did a workshop with Mātauranga Māori around Pikopiko Toroi, And I reckon those things there are really important to retain, because if we lose that over generations, then the Pikopiko and the Moriku loses its value to us as a peoples. But in saying that, we need to then turn around and do the work to make sure that that's sustainable. And that work looks like shooting the deer out. And I think that's for an individual, but I would think that most individuals would look at it and go, hey, if I'm taking from this ecosystem, like most people could be going, oh, if I'm taking from this ecosystem, I need to be giving back to this ecosystem. And if you're doing the taking without the giving back, well, something's going to catch up with you at some point. But getting to the trapping question, everyone can trap everywhere. Like this, as I said, there's some beautiful bush fragments next to almost every town. There's some pretty incredible projects in the backcountry. There's a lot of opportunities through schools and through organizations now. If getting into the backcountry is an issue for whānau, there's a lot of organizations you can team up with and jump on, and they'll take you out into the backcountry as well. So it's for everyone. It's not for experts. And we all become closer on our journey to being experts as time progresses. It's like everything, isn't it? It's like me with my level of reo, I'm so embarrassed with it. And I really hope that I can get better and better. But if I'm doing my little bits right now, one day I'll never be an expert, but one day, hopefully I'll be able to hold my head high and go, yep, I feel comfortable with where I'm at. And I think trapping's kind of the same, and looking after our whenua is kind of the same. It's those little steps that build up to the big step, eh?
Tika, kia ora e hoa. One of the other pātai was, have you made any comparisons in regards to using the Mātauranga and these methods that you're using, and more the Western science application of it, and you know, how accurate and how you know, is one better than the other, or?
Yeah, so that's how this kind of came about, really. I think we were doing a bunch of the stuff over in Te Uruwera, like informally in that, and then in the Waiaweka later backed it up to it's large landscape conservation scale stuff. So so for example, in Waiaweka, I was out there laying cue cards for rats and possums, and then suddenly we got the tawa fruit and the kohia fruit. Remember that for karo, and go, okay, we're getting really low rat numbers on our chew cards. What's our rats like on our kohia? We're getting high numbers on our possums. What's the browse looking like? How does that correlate in our tawa? And yeah, so it is correlated. I find oftentimes when in high fruiting seasons, where where fruit is in abundance, oftentimes our Western science monitoring tools, where we might be using peanut butter or an orange paste or something like that, it's like I say, fresh fruit is really delicious, and then like sometimes like our like more preserved stuff, you're like, no, I'll eat it when I don't have the fresh stuff. And so there's a bit of that, I think, and I think that there's a lot of scope and space to look into like our tawhara, for example, is just so delicious to these guys that they'll travel a long distance to get there. So it's super sensitive. So I think a lot of our kai species are a little bit more sensitive, but that's not to discount the standardization of Western science. And the beauty of Western science is you can roll it through any season, you know, it's consistent, whereas we're really relying on our maramataka of when these things are happening to be able to go, this is happening now, I'll monitor it using this now. So it's probably a little bit more less consistent, but it's probably a little bit more sensitive, in my opinion.
the deer have popped up in a few of your slides, and in regards to a lot of your kōrero in here, and quite a bit can hinge off what they do, and so it's, I suppose, sort of leads us to ask, will we ever get on top of the considering that they've got that, you know, they're really sensitive, they'll smell you a mile away, they could they'll hear you and smell you before, you know, the other way around. Will we, with just manpower, is that enough to get on top of the deer problem, and considering how you know the density of our ngahere and how remote some of these places are? They're in some pretty tricky places. You know, realistically, can we get on top of these problems with just manpower?
So yes, we can. Tāne is a really good example. The River of Man Adventures. They've got a project in there, and they've done an incredible job at lowering deer numbers and pig numbers and wild cattle numbers, wild horses too, actually, believe it or not, through just manpower on the ground. And there's lots of departmental. Te Urewera was another one, eh? They shot out most of the deer to really low numbers, so that the forest started to regenerate all through ground hunting. I think the real question is, though, what's our social license? What's our want? So for each hapu, for each whānau, for each marae, what is your aspirations? Because for many whānau, the deer is the one kai they're interested in the ngahere, you know, and same with the pigs, you know. And so what are our aspirations? Do we want to have the Pikopiko back? Do we want to have the fruiting species coming through? Are we capable, do we have the knowledge now of recognizing those things in our ngahere? Or do we want to increase our literacy in that space to realize that, to look at the impact that deer are having right here on our doorstep? And then what is our aspiration, you know? And I think it's about finding that balance, and finding that balance where whānau are still able to eat meat, eat deer, eat venison, or are whānau happy to take the short-term hit where we just have no deer, and then get to a point where our forest system is really flourishing, and then hopefully one day be able to harvest our money. Those are all questions, and I'm not sure I've got an answer.
Because it does sort of move into quite a contentious conversation, eh? That kaupapa, as we probably read with Tāne and Malcolm's tuhinga. I had an interview with him earlier last year as well around his research and using traditional Māori methods around pest control. It's cool, yeah, awesome kōrero. There's interest as to what a weta sound, what sound it makes. If you could give us your weta impersonation.
I probably can't do a great weta impersonation with my voice box, but they're cool. Weta are so cool. They've got eardrums on their legs, and so they rub their back legs against their abdomen like that, and it just creates like a, you know, those little those instruments they used to have in school where you got a stick and a like serrated like log, and you just do that. Weta sound like that. They're just the coolest little dudes. They're just amazing. And they got their little eardrums and they listen for each other. The males have these huge gangster ass mandibles that they use for scrapping and just like looking cool. And the females have those long, beautiful spikes, but they're ovipositors that they lay their eggs with. Weta are amazing little creatures.
You didn't take the bait there. Though. I think they wanted the sound.
No chance.
Gotta go.
And trapper.
Anei te tahi pātai, another one, Sam, was a rabbit high on the trap list.
Pardon me?
A rabbit high on the trap list.
Not for me personally. Rabbits are a big issue, especially when it comes to erosion. I don't live in those landscapes up here, so rabbits aren't massive for me over here. And trapping's probably a fairly labor-intensive and not very effective way of doing it. But again, it's probably good to have our people on the ground doing it. The thing about rabbits, I reckon, though, is that they really drive the stoat and the ferret numbers up. And so when, you know, our stoats and our ferrets have plenty of rabbits, there's plenty of stoats and ferrets, and they have massive impacts on our manu as well.
And one more part I Sam was, how often should we be monitoring? So using our culture indicators and Western methods.
That really depends on what your outcomes are and the questions you have. I think in an ideal world, our people will be in the whenua often. And I think as we're walking through the whenua, we are monitoring. With a Western science methodologies, oftentimes we monitor quarterly, which is good. It gives you a monitor in each Western calendar season. But for me, it's about that seasonality in there. For us in the Waiaweka, it's about being in there often enough to notice those fruiting periods, notice those changes over time, and we're all monitoring all the time. Just like when we're raising our kids, we're constantly kind of looking for those tohu with our kids to monitor how they're doing, when we need to feed them, all that sort of stuff, you know. Looking after the whenua is that same kind of thing. It's an all day, everyday thing, in my opinion.
I'm sure we'd have a couple of people concur when I say that you need your own TV show, Sam, just to get all this Mātauranga and actually see, if not to get down to you in Waiaweka and spend. Probably we'd need a lot more than a day to hang out with you, just to get a lot of this Mātauranga and just to gain a little bit of an insight into this world and a lot of the Mātauranga that many weren't privy to, but also but may even they may be familiar with all this kōrero, but didn't know its application in regards to pest control and monitoring and trapping. No reira, we're again very fortunate and privileged to have you share your Mātauranga with us today, and we're looking forward to doing more mahi with you. I'm sure there'll be more requests for that after this paku workshop. And just like to thank you for your time today and sharing the Mātauranga that was given to you from your kaumātua, all your teachers and all your the father figures and the fire figures that fed that Mātauranga to you over the years. We can't thank you enough, Sam.